All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you, everybody, for coming this morning. Little did we know, as CCIMs, with all the education that we have, all the years of experience that we have, as hard as we all work, that really all we had to do was go to plumbing school and be a plumber, work the month of January here in Atlanta, and take the rest of the year off. Two out of 4 weeks in January, we're going to hit 12 degrees, and Atlanta is just really not meant for that. But anyway, thanks for coming out this morning. My name is Paul Ozzie. I'm with Roberts Commercial. I am your 2014 president. So again, I appreciate everyone coming. Today we've got a great presentation with David Haddow, who I think most people know who David is and have heard him speak. And so no surprise at our turnout this morning. I'd like to thank our programs co-chairs, Ann Von Martin and Michael Reeves, for putting this together. Michael's here this morning. And then we've got a couple of other announcements. We have our first 101 class that's coming up February 3rd through 6th. If you have not taken 101, I encourage you to do so. We have some seats available for that. February 27th is our next chapter meeting. And that will be leasing strategies in the new economic paradigm. So please mark your calendars for that. In March 3rd through 6th, we are teaching our first 104 class. And the reason I said first, we are teaching 6 classes this year as a chapter. Atlanta is a lot of people like coming to Atlanta. It's been very successful. We have 2 101 classes, 2 104 classes, and then a 102 and 103. So please spread the word. You don't have to get a hotel room. You don't have to go anywhere. And you can, I know one person that's considering just doing the whole track this year, just 101 through 104 and knocking it out. So that's a really great opportunity that we have. And then March 13th is our networking social at First Citizens Bank. So put that on your calendar. Then one of the more important things of the morning, I would like to thank our current 2014 chapter sponsors. There are still sponsorship opportunities available if you are so inclined. Our platinum sponsors, Marcus and Miller Chap, Ackerman, the Simpson Company, and Kitchen Kelly Gaines. Our silver sponsors, Adams Realtors, Bull Realty, Commercial, and the Commercial Real Estate Show, Yates Construction, Standard Landscape, Stout, Kaiser, and Hendrick, First Colony Financial, and Strategic Exchange Advisors. So thank you very much to our sponsors. It really helps, obviously, with these programs, but it helps our budget throughout the year, so we appreciate that. All right, David Haddow, our speaker this morning. Like I said, most of us know who David is. He's a real estate consultant, speaker, instructor, and president of Haddow & Company, which is an Atlanta-based real estate consulting firm, founded in 1989. You know, David has his specialty, I think, is we've heard him speak on multifamily and condominiums, and he predicted the downfall of the Midtown condo market, and is really usually spot on in his forecast. So, looking forward to hearing everything he's going to talk about today. He's had articles in numerous real estate publications, including Urban Land, National Real Estate Investor, Appraisal Journal, etc. David has an undergraduate degree from Emory, and he also teaches at Georgia State and at Georgia Tech. So we've got a very knowledgeable speaker, very knowledgeable and capable presenter. And so without further ado, David Haddow.
Thank you. Do you mind if I at least try this with the mic and the thing? I'll speak loudly. I hate to have the whole thing. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
All right. One little caveat. I just had my knee replaced 6 weeks ago. So if I start to wilt while I'm up here, you know why. But I'm going to do my best to stay standing through my entire talk. First of all, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. So I was telling somebody as I came in, I know I've been in this room before speaking to some group. I just can't remember who it was. When I was asked to do this, which was just a week ago, so I didn't have a whole lot of time to prepare, it was timely in the sense that I was getting ready to write our newsletter, which we do quarterly, which, by the way, if anybody wants to get on that list, give me a card and I'll get you on it. We do it, they say, 4 times a year. But I was beginning to research and think about that, and I did it, frankly, by just simply going through news clippings from the past year, 2013. I was in our office every Monday morning. One of our young associates, that one being my son, reports on what's in the paper, what's in the news. And I got the sense during the course of the year there was a lot of stuff going on. But frankly, going back and looking at it collectively at the end of the year, and I think you'll find out in a minute, it's incredible how much went on last year in a positive vein. And of course, we've all been looking for positive economic and real estate news for quite some time. So I'm going to call my talk today, 2013, a watershed year, which simply means a pivotal year, an inflection point, and I truly believe it was. And I think it bodes well for the future. So I'll start with that positive little hint. One of the things that happened as I went through all this stuff, and it really took me a couple of days to do it, because the book's about that thick, is that 5 themes emerged from reading about all these announcements. One was economic vitality. Second was increased diversification in our economy here. Third, clear evidence of a rebound in the housing market. Fourth, improving commercial real estate fundamentals. Not a wholesale change in the market, but improvement. And lastly, and maybe most nebulous, Atlanta becoming a more interesting place. So those are the 5 themes I want to talk about today, and give you a little bit more backup as to why I think those were prevailing themes last year. And then I'm going to close by talking about what I think the themes might be this year, which of course is all speculation, but hopefully there's some basis for it. So with that as a backdrop, now I go to my notes. In our business, we often forget that what drives real estate is the economy. And we forget that connection, and sometimes our real estate activity gets way ahead of economic growth. And we certainly have experienced that of late and paid the price for it. So why do I say I think things are vital right now? What are the signs of that? And what I'd like to do is share with you some statistics. You've seen them, but maybe you haven't thought about them in a comprehensive way. Number one, and most important, the national economy is firing on pretty strong cylinders right now. We had 4.1% GDP growth in the third quarter. We're adding jobs consistently. There have been a couple months where it dips, but have had a sustained period now of job growth. We've had a significant drop in the unemployment rate. To me, one of the best measures, and fortunately I've benefited from this, you realize the Dow Jones went up 26.5% last year. 1 year, 26.5%. The other thing that was startling to me is that since March of 2009, which was the low point in the Dow at 6,500, market's up 10,000 points in 5 years. Now, you can argue that some of that's a bubble, some of it's speculative, but a lot of it is real economic growth and profits in companies. Okay, so that's a pretty good benchmark. Locally, and more importantly to us, it looks like we added 60,000 jobs last year in metropolitan Atlanta, which is the biggest job growth we've had since 2006. You may recall that from 2008 to 2010, we lost 180,000 jobs. Okay? The last 3 years, we've had positive job growth, 11, 12, and 13, last year being the strongest yet. We still have not returned to the job level that we had in 2007. We'll probably get there this year. So we've been rebuilding, frankly, for the last few years, but the trend is up and positive. Another measure is unemployment rate. Most recent unemployment rate for Metro Atlanta is 7%. Incredibly, we got up to 10.7% 4 years ago, January 2010, which is unheard of for Atlanta. And as you all know, in this last recession, which was also uncharacteristic of Atlanta, we had a more severe correction than the U.S., and we struggled to recover. But what's happened in the last 14 months And this is kind of interesting. We started tracking some of these indicators on a monthly basis. In fact, we started tracking them 5 years ago on a monthly basis because we were looking for that inflection point. And the inflection point for Atlanta came about 14 months ago, about October 2012. From that point on, our job growth and our house prices have significantly outpaced the U.S. Prior to that, we were either bumping along the same path or significantly below the U.S. So our sort of surge, if you will, is really only about 14 months old. And hence, once again, I think last year being the real watershed year. Another thing that hit me getting ready for this, and I find this the most interesting thing of all, and food for thought for all of us. In the mid-2000s, we had a newsletter that came out in 2007, and it was called, you may remember this, Alan Joel, if you read your newsletters, A Puzzling Disconnect. And we talked about the disconnect between population growth and employment growth, that we were having phenomenal housing starts, we were having significant population growth every year, and yet we weren't having many jobs. And we were puzzled by that. And we didn't really know how to explain it, but we took a stab at it. Well, what's interesting to me that I realized the other day is in the last 3 years, in 2010 to 2013, our job growth has exceeded our population growth. It's reversed itself in terms of growth rate, which to me is a very healthy sign in terms of a sustainable economic expansion. So that's the economy. That's why I think we're in a good place. And a lot of it's frankly cyclical. You know, we went through a severe downturn and now we're riding it back up again. Second topic, which is really more germane to Atlanta, is I'm convinced that our economy, which has always been extremely diverse and has been our strength, is becoming more diverse as opposed to less. We were heavily dependent on construction activity, real estate activity, and that's one of the reasons we had such a severe setback when the housing market collapsed. I think what's happened in the last 3 to 4 years, and particularly last year, is a very healthy move to develop other sectors of our economy and add to our diversity and strength moving forward. Once again, also suggesting sustained economic growth. So I want to hit you a few high points. Now, it's funny, I wrote this outline yesterday. It was about 10 pages of my handwritten scratch. And I gave it to my son yesterday at the office. And I said, Lance, I really need you to type this thing up because I hate to have to read from my notes. Well, I was looking at my computer last night, nothing, right? I get up this morning, nothing on the computer, and I'm going, oh boy. I'm going to be reading this legal pad, and I won't be able to read my own handwriting. And my son, thank God, texted my wife this morning at 6:30 or whatever it was, saying, have Dad check the computer. I've got the outline. So unfortunately, I got this. So I can read it. All right, here's some things that happened last year. And you probably remember a lot of this, but frankly, I didn't remember half of it. So hopefully this will be interesting to you. I thought a real milestone was Children's Healthcare buying the old Executive Park Hotel there at Druid Hills in I-85. So let me back up. The first theme I want to talk about under diversification is the healthcare sector. And I want to share with you some of the things that have happened in the past year in the healthcare sector. That one is a big deal from a lot of standpoints because that building's been an eyesore for years and laying fallow. So it's pretty exciting that that use is, or that group is taking control, and I don't know exactly what they're going to do with it, but it's certainly a positive. Emory Healthcare relaunched its plans to spend $300 million on a new hospital. If you remember, they announced that about 5 years ago, and then they put it on the shelf when the recession hit. So they're now back at it. The Proton Therapy Center that's under construction there at Ponce de Leon and Peachtree, that's a $200 million facility. It's one of only about 5 in the U.S. And if you don't know about proton therapy, it's sort of the latest, greatest treatment for cancer. And people will come from all over the country to go to that facility. A group that's based here called the Task Force for Global Health, which is headed by some folks that used to be with the CDC. They got a $28 million grant from the Gates Foundation last year. The Da Vinci, have y'all heard of the Da Vinci surgical system? It's robotic surgery, and it's sort of the latest, greatest methodology for surgery. And unfortunately, I've had that myself. They announced that they were going to set up a surgical center in Norcross to train surgeons throughout the Southeast. So people are going to be flying in from all over the Southeast to train in Atlanta on how to use this latest technology. Northside announced that they were looking at Midtown to open a facility, Northside Hospital. Wellstar developed a corporate campus and announced that they're going to open 4 or 5 new satellite campuses around Atlanta. There's a facility called Cancer Treatment Centers of America. You may have seen this. It's on the expressway down in Noonan. They just built that a year ago, right? They've already bought the adjoining 75 acres to launch a new expansion. Another thing that happened that I think is pretty cool, and I think bodes well for Atlanta, is Emory created what's called the Drug Innovation Centers, LLC, which is a vehicle to take the research that's coming out of Emory, as well as Georgia Tech, through their biomedical research program, and commercialize it. You may, and I know Emory was instrumental in developing this HIV vaccine years ago and got millions of dollars for that. So they have been very interested in continuing to grow that business. Just yesterday, there was an announcement that CDC is planning a major expansion of their campus. So our healthcare sector, which already was and has been a major cog in our economy, is certainly gotten some new juice. Second sector is technology, and I think this is the biggest story of all. I think Atlanta has developed very discernible strengths in key sectors of the technology industry that are growing at a big clip. Those being internet security, mobile software devices, payments processing, supply chain management, logistics, IT, healthcare IT, customer support IT, and just give you some examples of some of the things going on. AirWatch, which is out in this neck of the woods, very fast-growing company that continues to add people. Georgia Tech is talking about building a high-performance computing center in Midtown in the Technology Square development. It's going to be a 700,000 square foot facility. And you cannot overestimate the importance of Georgia Tech in attracting these technology companies. GM, Hewlett-Packard, Ernst & Young all announced IT and customer support facilities that are going up in the Alpharetta area last year. Several healthcare IT companies either had significant growth or newly relocated to Atlanta. At the other end of the spectrum, you've got this Atlanta Tech Village that this guy, David Cummings, who is apparently a serial entrepreneur, started there on Piedmont, there in Buckhead. I'm sure you all know about that. He bought one of those 2 mid-rise office buildings, converted it to basically a business incubator. Well, that thing's up and running. And there are other groups. The guy who started Scout Mob has been scouting around trying to find a facility to do an incubator in. There's a group called Founder Institute that's announced they want to do something similar. There are new innovation centers that have been launched by AT&T, Panasonic, and others at Georgia Tech's facility at Technology Square. So the infrastructure, as well as the venture capital, which is the other big story. Atlanta has always been sort of shortchanged when it comes to venture capital. Venture capital is starting to flow in, and the infrastructure to support startup businesses is really starting to take hold, which really bodes well for future growth. Because if you hear any economists speak, they'll tell you, or anybody who watches labor statistics, that most of the growth in the economy is not expansion of existing businesses, it's new startup businesses, smaller companies. They're growing. One story is this company called Cloud Sherpas. I love the name, Cloud Sherpas. In 2008, it had 3 employees. Today it has 600, and they just announced a major expansion. So this whole thing with the cloud, you've been reading regularly about new data centers that are being built in Atlanta. Well, that's because of the growing needs for that kind of backup stuff. So it's a pretty exciting time, and I think really is a healthy trend for our economy. The tourism sector, you can't hardly miss the stuff that's going on there. The College Football Hall of Fame finally got started last year, will open in August of this year. That's a $66 million facility that's already paid for the most part. The National Civil and Human Rights Museum will open in May. That's an $80 million facility. That was started last year. Those were two projects that had been on the drawing boards for a long time, but took a long time to get funding. The Atlanta streetcar, which is my greatest nemesis because I'm in the Hurt Building downtown, and they've torn up Edgewood Avenue probably 5 times in the last 18 months and repaved it. And one of those times, it revealed the railroad ties that served the original streetcar that ran down Edgewood Avenue are still there underneath the pavement. So I don't know why they didn't just go back to that and use it. But fortunately, that's supposed to open in the spring, which if it does will be a miracle. But sometime this year, the Atlanta streetcar will open. Now, will the Atlanta streetcar transform Atlanta? Absolutely not. But what it will do is provide a really nice link between the King Center and Centennial Olympic Park, which is where all the attractions are concentrated. So it will be good for the tourism sector. And there will be people, even from Atlanta, who go downtown with their families just to ride the streetcar at least once. Have y'all seen the Ferris wheel downtown? Y'all probably don't go downtown much. Some of you do. I was told, and I don't know if I believe this, I meant to call them yesterday to see if I can get the facts. The thing opened in July. That in the first 30 days, it had 70,000, don't quote me on that, some enormous number of people rode that thing. So that's there, up and operating, at least for now. The other thing, of course, is the Beltline continues to be expanded and improved, and the park system associated with that. There are new hotels planned downtown, several actually. The Old Days Inn, there on Spring Street, which was a real ho-hum, boxy facility, is now in a loft hotel. They totally gutted it and redid it. Hyatt House is building over by the aquarium. Homewood Suites is building by the aquarium. There are at least 2 others in the works downtown. So it's a pretty exciting time. Fourth sector is filmmaking, and I know you've been reading about that. Maybe even spotted a few stars in the restaurants. That has become a big deal for the state of Georgia, not just Atlanta. Last year it was announced that Pinecrest Studios was part of a group buying 288 acres in Fayette County to build this mega production facility. There's another 168-acre facility in Covington. There's already Lakewood Fairgrounds, where that group came in a few years ago and leased those facilities, which has done really well. And then our friend Jim Jacoby, recently announced that he's going to take the old Western Electric building, now known as something else, up there at Jimmy Carter and I-85, and create a filmmaking and education campus. So that's a evolving and relatively new and increasingly significant sector of our economy. Corporate commitments. Think of the big name commitments we got last year. State Farm, obviously, is the big one in this neck of the woods, where they announced that Atlanta's going to be one of the 3 regional hubs for the U.S., and they want to consolidate about 1.5 million square feet of space. Have you seen some of the numbers they've been paying for property over there by the MARTA station? I mean, it's off the charts. Pulte, and you can't blame them, decided to leave Detroit. And they picked Atlanta, right? Gone to Buckhead. Carter's, which was already here. Carter's, this was a revelation when I was reading through these news blasts. They moved from Midtown to Buckhead. Once again, it's not a new company to Atlanta, but when they did that, they consolidated some functions, IT functions that they had in Connecticut, and brought 200 more people to Atlanta as part of that move. AT&T, which obviously has long had a presence here in Atlanta, has announced they're adding 1,300 jobs. Even Newell Rubbermaid, if you remember, when they came to Atlanta a few years ago, they were essentially bankrupt. Well, they added 100 people last year. So we went through, if you recall, after UPS and Holiday Inn came here in the early 90s, we had a pretty long drought where we had very little in the way of corporate relocation activity. Think of what's happened in the last few years, not just 13, but think of NCR, Novellus, I'm drawing a blank on it, Red Hat didn't come, Red Prairie. There's several others that have moved to Atlanta. So we're riding a wave that's very positive in that regard. Last thing, and it's not directly in Atlanta, but it certainly impacts us, is the deepening of the Savannah Harbor. Once again, been talked about for years. We got a little behind the eight ball because the widening of the Panama Canal is going to be done next year, and the hope was to have Savannah Harbor deepened in time to benefit from those bigger ships that are coming through. But last year, Congress finally get through the Corps of Engineer approval process, got a $400 allocation from Congress, $230 million from the state of Georgia to deepen the port from 42 to 47 feet. That has big implications for our industrial market here. A good example recently of that I skipped over under our corporate commitments is Procter & Gamble. Just announced they're building a 1 million square foot distribution facility on the south side of town. So obviously that's an important part of our economy that, once again, is going to get a real boost with that. All right, third theme, I've run out of time already, I better pick it up, is a housing rebound. The collapse in the housing market had a disproportionately severe impact on our economy. Why? You realize in 2004, we issued 74,000 housing permits in Metro Atlanta. Apply a little deductive reasoning to that. 74 housing units, assuming 2 people per unit, that's 150,000 people that would have to be added just to keep up with that level of production. So we got way ahead of ourselves, and we paid the piper. 5 years later, 2009, we permitted 6,500 units. We went from 74,000 to 6,500. That's the bad news. Good news is, last year and the final numbers are in, but through November, we permitted 22,000. So we're gradually building back up. I don't think we'll ever see 70,000 again, but we went up 50% just last year in housing permits. As I mentioned earlier, pricing has accelerated, price recovery has accelerated greatly in the last 14 months. Year-over-year gains on a monthly basis have been 16 to 20% for the last 14 months in terms of price appreciation. There's a large new single-family development that's been started in Forsyth. There are a lot of people thought after the debacle that it would be many years before anybody started a ground-up residential development because there's so many developed pads and partially developed subdivisions. Don't need to tell you about the apartment boom that's underway. It's incredible and probably getting out of hand. And we'll talk about that in a second. Condo market, incredibly enough, and we're about to come out with our condo report tomorrow. You ready for this? In in-town Atlanta, which is the market we track, there are only 300 unsold condominiums left, first generation. 5 years ago, that number was over 7,000. There's 300. Why? Because we haven't built any, other than some townhome projects, and they continue to sell. The other barometer about that's noteworthy is the resale market for condominiums. For the last 2 years, each year, prices have gone up 15 to 20%. So eventually, obviously, those prices are going to get back up to where they need to be to justify new construction, and that day is not far off. Real estate capital is, I'm jumping ahead of myself. That's basically it for the once again. So there's clear evidence that the housing market is back in all sectors, frankly. And one of the hottest sectors of the market right now is townhomes, particularly close-in townhomes. You talk to developers, and that's really starting to drive prices back up, and there's really an urgency back in the market for that type of product. Number 4, improving commercial real estate fundamentals. Okay? You have to work a little harder to get bullish about this, but it's there if you look carefully. Vacancy rates have come down a little bit, not much. Rents are still flat. In fact, rents have been flat for 30 years in the office and industrial markets, if you're honest with yourself about it. But at least they're flat. Absorption is improving. Once again, it depends on whose numbers you believe, and they always seem to get readjusted. But the most recent number I saw yesterday from Jones Lang was that we absorbed 1.8 million last year square feet, which is not terrific, but it's certainly a lot better than negative absorption, which we had for 4 years in a row prior to 2012, I should say. We've got talk bubbling up. There was an announcement yesterday about 3 Alliance Center. of new spec office buildings. Now, who knows what'll get built when, but there are people thinking about it. And you may have seen at the end of December, I found this really interesting, the closing of that shopping center across from Lenox Square called the Shops Around Lenox, which Ackerman built years ago and floundered for years. A group called Healy Weatherholtz bought it about 4 years ago, I guess. And just so happened I was at the eye doctor yesterday and ran into David Witt, who used to be with Seelig, who is an investor in that deal. So I was able to confirm that what was in the paper is actually true, that I was so shocked when I read it. But he confirmed it and said he just got a check to prove it. They paid $24 million for the property in 2009. They put 20 in it, and they just sold it for $71.8 million. It's a reef. And to me, what that symbolizes is a few things. One, return of capital, with a group like Reef coming in and making that kind of investment. Two, he said when they pro forma the deal, they thought it would get $30 a foot in rent. They ended up getting more like 60. It also says that even in the retail sector, which is probably the most challenged sector of the real estate market right now, there are success stories if people are creative and invest wisely. Land prices are clearly on an upward trajectory right now. And you may or may not know this, but the only significant spec building, office building, that's under construction right now is Ponce City Market. Of course, it's not really under construction, it's under renovation. And they have 450,000 square feet of office space in that building. A lot of people thought they were crazy because those floors are like 70,000 square feet apiece. So there's a lot of depth to the space and there's a lot of interior space, and getting natural light in there is tricky. Well, they're 70% pre-leased. They have done some big deals. They've got they may be 100% leased by the time the thing opens. Done phenomenally well. All right, lastly, Atlanta becoming more interesting. This was something my son, being a younger person and more attuned to these kind of things, suggested to me. And I would say to you as an old guy that things like Midtown West, where my man Alan Joel's office is, he was on the cutting edge when he went over there. If you haven't been over there, is a phenomenal story. It started about 10 years ago, and it's incredible how that area's evolved and developed, and there's a lot more to come. If you go on the other side of town to the old Fourth Ward, a similar transformation is underway, which attaches to the Beltline, which is stimulating a lot of activity. All these new attractions that are coming in, I think are going to really make Atlanta a more interesting place, a place people want to visit. I think Ponce City Market will become a cultural attraction for Atlanta. I think people will go to Ponce City Market just to see it. I think people will go to Buckhead, Atlanta, which, as you know, is now going full throttle after sitting there dormant for years. That's one thing I skipped over earlier. Avalon and Buckhead, Atlanta, which were stalled for years, are both going full tilt. Both developers were able to secure financing well in excess of $100 million for those two projects. So what does that tell you about the market? I think even this film stuff adds a little wrinkle to Atlanta that's kind of intriguing. I'll tell you, in the Hurt building, and since the leasing guy's in here and he knows how I felt about it, they were filming movies like, they were using the Hurt building like a movie set until the tenants finally reminded the landlord, hey, this is a place of business. And the crowning blow was when they took the old City Grill restaurant and converted it into a strip club for one of the movies they were filming, and we're actually bringing strippers into the building to film the movie. That was sort of the final straw. Sorry about that. No, not yet. The other thing that in my mind is really been fun to watch is the transformation of Midtown. Midtown, if you drive up Peachtree now, looks and feels totally different. And it's not just the buildings and the sort of cavernous feel created by that. It's the streetscape, it's the pets walking up and down the street, it's the storefronts, and it's really become a truly urban place, which has taken a long time, and it'll continue to fill in, but we think that's a very exciting development. So those are 5 themes for this year. I'm going to be real quick on the others so we can have a few questions. I think there are 5 things to watch. Those are things for 2013. 5 things to watch this year. I really think downtown And I've been an advocate of downtown my whole career, so take it with a grain of salt. I'm biased. But I really do think the stage has finally been set for some change downtown. It's not going to happen in a dramatic way. It's not going to happen overnight. But what I would point to is Georgia State University obviously has been the anchor. But Georgia State is right now building an $82 million law school building from ground up. They bought 55 Park Place. They bought 100 Auburn Avenue. This is all last year. They're expanding their science park because the first phase was such a phenomenal success. They're now thinking about more student housing. In the meantime, right next door, Amblin out of Valdosta is building a huge private student housing development. They opened the first phase of that in the fall, which was the old Lada Hotel, which had been empty 30 years maybe. Maybe I'm exaggerating, but a long time. It leased up like that at big rents. A group bought the Equitable building last year and is plowing a bunch of money into it. And they signed a pretty big lease with the Georgia Pacific entity because they're having to move out of 55 Park Place, so that's helping to give that a boost. Jeff Shaw's group recently bought 34 Peachtree, which is a bright spot because they did a great job with the old 101 Marietta Tower. We just sold the Oxford building to a group that may convert it into a boutique hotel, interestingly enough. The old 250 Piedmont building, which is across the street from Oxford, which SunTrust vacated a couple years ago, is under contract to an apartment group that wants to convert that to apartments. I already mentioned the hotels that are in the works. So there's a lot of public and private investment. Coca-Cola's putting IT people downtown. They leased 260,000 square feet at SunTrust Plaza. The other thing that has happened sort of quietly is that 191 Peachtree Tower, which Cousins owns, which had gotten down to like 20% occupancy at about the time or shortly after they bought it, is now probably 90% leased. Georgia Pacific Center has had some significant success lately. So finally, downtown is starting to look up. And in my mind, it's the next frontier. Second of all, I think you'll see return of condominium development. It's going to be primarily townhomes and probably conversions initially. Don't be surprised if some of these apartments that are under construction become condominiums before it's over. I think we're going to wind up with overbuilding in the apartment sector. That's not so hard to discern. Unfortunately, we have a tendency to follow the money in our business, and that's where the money's been flowing, and we've been following it in earnest. So we're watching that carefully. I think you'll see resumed office industrial development. I don't think, once again, on a big scale, because we still have a lot of vacancy, but we're certainly poised for a rebound there. And lastly, and this one to me is the one I'm going to watch with the most interest, is what's the next in-town area to emerge. I think it's kind of fun to speculate. You think about Memorial Drive corridor, you think about things that might feed off the success of Midtown West, but I think it's interesting to speculate about. Because I would say to you that if somebody went into Midtown West 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, well, maybe more than 5, 7 or 8 years ago, and bought property, you stood to make more money on that investment than just about anything you could have invested in Atlanta. And I'm going to stop right there and ask you to hopefully ask me at least one question so I know somebody's been listening. Thank you. Yes, Charlie, I knew I could count on you.
David, what do you think is going to happen to the Turner Field and the surrounding park?
I knew that would come up. I have no idea, but that gives me an opportunity to editorialize. I think it's unbelievable that that's happening. I think it's that it happened without any public discourse. That, to me, it's such a misallocation of resources to leave that building behind. And it's a crazy location that they're going to in terms of. So that I can't answer your question. I don't know what will happen to it. I think, frankly, on a different front, now that I've gotten started, I think Arthur Blank pulled a fast one with this dome. I mean, the original plan was, I want an open air stadium, and they were going to build it north of the World Congress Center. Then all of a sudden, maybe I can do better if I can cover the thing up when I want to. But if the dome's still standing, I'm going to be competing head-to-head for non-Falcons events. So very subtly and quietly, all of a sudden, the location shifted to the current dome and included demolition of the current dome, which is 21 years old. Turner Field, of course, is only 17 years old. So I couldn't help but spit that out.
It seems to me that Fort McPherson's been sitting there looking for biomedical, didn't work, looking for this. And the last thing I heard, which sort of chilled me, was that maybe they put some city office buildings down there for workers.
That should chill you.
Yeah, that needs to be someplace that draws people.
I don't know. I have not had any involvement with that. I'd love to have involvement with it. And I've tried through the guy I know who runs the Georgia Alliance to get into the mix, but I've never even been on Fort McPherson. So I don't know what's going on, but I would agree with you. The last thing we would need to do is move city offices or state offices down there. And then Fort McPherson, same thing. And Fort Gillum has floundered as well. I mean, nothing that I know has happened down there. Bill? You would have to speak up, Bill Adams. I'm sure they still are hopeful that would get done. I have no idea where it stands in terms of raising the money to do it. So, yes, I really don't know. I frankly don't see that as a high priority myself. I'll give you another little factoid. When the streetcar was hatched, the original budget was like $60 million, and we got a federal Tiger grant for 46. So it was sold to the community based on the notion that, well, most of it's paid for by federal money. You know what the final budget for the streetcar is? $100 million. You know what the Tiger grant is? 46. So where do you think the rest of it came from? I don't want to end on a negative note. Ask me something so I can go back to the positive. People always accuse me of being so negative. I'm really not. I'm very bullish on Atlanta right now, as you may have ascertained.
Student housing.
Yes.
Where do you see that growing over the next 2 years or so for Georgia State, Georgia Tech?
Georgia State, of course, is the most underserved university, maybe anywhere, in terms of student housing that really wants to be a residential campus. The numbers are, the university has 32,000 students. There are 4,000 plus or minus beds that are owned by the university. Amway, I can't remember what number they're building, but pick a number, 800, I'm not sure. So it's still going to be a very low ratio of housing to student enrollment. So you would suspect that downtown is still fertile ground for more student housing, whether it's public or private. In Midtown right now, as you know, Amway is building a big student housing development, and another one has been announced right next door. What's a little puzzling about that to me, I was not involved in either one of them, so I don't know any of the details, is Georgia Tech actually has a high level of on-campus housing relative to its enrollment. So I don't think there's such a big shortfall. The bigger implication is how does that impact the apartment market? Okay, all of a sudden, some demand, student demand, that would have gone into apartments is going to be siphoned off into this. You know what the rents are in that new student housing? $900,000 per bed per month. Yeah, it's unbelievable how expensive. It used to be $400, $500 a bed. So it is really ratcheted up. So don't tell me that's not a competitive factor relative to the apartment market. One more question, Paul? Anybody with something good, juicy? Well, thank you very much for having me.
Great, thank you, David, very much for that. As promised, very interesting program. Couple quick reminders. Remember our 101 class coming up February 3rd through 6th, and then our February 27th chapter meeting here, leasing strategies in the new economic paradigm. And then just another quick thing, there's a few of us from Forsyth County that drive here. We got to get up early and so forth. But I think we have a new golden steering wheel winner for the farthest traveled. William, I forget William's last name, drove up this morning from Albany. So William's in the back there. So thank you, William. And, you know, one of the things we would like to get more out of Atlanta participation, so thank you for that. So William is this month's Golding Steering Wheel Award winner, and we'll see what happens next month. Thank you. We are adjourned.